What happens if we divide a 401k equally on the date of divorce? How does that operate?
Yeah, so generally,
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again today. My name is Holly Mullin. I am the managing partner at Sterling Law Offices. I have with me today attorney Mike Kyrios. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
of course, yeah, thank you for having me.
And I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I'd like to talk about ensuring appropriate valuation of certain assets in a divorce. Specifically, I'd like to focus the conversation on retirement accounts. Retirement accounts can often be a significant portion of the overall marital estate, meaning they make up a large portion of the assets. And people can be confused about how we value them, how we divide them. So it's really important that we flesh that out and give our clients a solid understanding of how we approach that issue. So when it comes to retirement, we hear about 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, pensions. Can you help us understand the differences between certain accounts?
Yeah, so just really briefly before I do that, I think this is really an important area to be aware of because property division is going to be something that comes up in every single divorce. You know, some people have kids and some people have spousal support, and some cases don't, but every case is going to involve division of property and debts. So it's going to apply to everybody that goes through a divorce. Now, specifically on retirement accounts, and you make a good point as well that these accounts are often sometimes the lion's share of the overall marital estate value. So it's really important to make sure that we're doing this in a thoughtful way. So there are different types of retirement accounts. And, in my experience, some people have really good familiarity with what types of accounts they have and the tax implications of those accounts. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people just have some money taken from their paycheck and they don't see it or think about it and don't really have a good understanding of that. So there are different types of accounts, of course. Some are what we call defined contribution plans. These are 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, those types of accounts where people contribute a set amount of money to this pot, basically. And those types of accounts, when we're talking about valuing for the purposes of divorce, they're generally relatively easy because they have a value to them. They have a market value. You can pull a statement. I could go and check what my 401k balance is right now. And we do account for tax implications, which I'll talk about in just a second here. But the value is the value. It's relatively easy to determine. Where it gets a little trickier is what we call defined benefit plans. And a defined benefit plan is basically a pension. And so you put in a certain amount of money, your employer puts in a certain amount of money, and then there's a payment amount that is due to you at some point in the future on a monthly basis, generally. So those accounts are very difficult to determine. You can't determine the value without getting it actually professionally appraised, professionally valued. And so what that looks like, there are a couple specific companies that do that, and those companies are going to look at, okay, how old are you? What's your general life expectancy? What is the contributions that you've put in and your employer has put in? What age can you begin drawing on that pension? And then based on what that expected payout is and your life expectancy, what is the total value that this pension will provide to you over the course of your lifetime? We also have to consider that, say $1,000 today is not what $1,000 will be 10 years from now. So we have to factor that in as well. There's a lot of different moving parts that get evaluated. But the long and short of it is that there will ultimately be a report that says the present day value, worth today's dollars, is X amount, and that's the value we'll typically use for a divorce. So again, there's quite a bit more that goes into it than if you're just pulling a statement for a 401k or an IRA.
Okay, so let's say we go about valuing them the date that we send the statements to an actuary, the professional who's going to value these accounts. What happens if we divide, let's just call it a 401k equally on the date of divorce? Um, and the person who owns the 401k, the person who was originally the contributor, if they continue contributing to that 401k after the divorce, is there a cutoff date, or how does that operate?
Yeah, so generally we'll have language in a final agreement that says it's X percent or X dollar amount as of the date of divorce. And so if there's a delay between the time that you've divided it per the divorce and the actual paperwork being completed, and during that time, let's say I'm continuing to contribute it, then those additional contributions are mine generally. There is language that you can put in where if it's a percentage and it's adjusted for any gains or losses which occur post divorce but before the actual division, you can have language to address that as well. But in the most simple way, generally speaking, what I'm contributing to my retirement after the divorce is going to be mine.
Got it. Understood. You mentioned briefly earlier tax considerations. So, presumably, there is some sort of difference between certain accounts with how we contemplate taxes. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so this is an important part. So the government is always going to tax your money at some point, but we generally don't do what we call double taxing, which is taxing it once and then taxing it again. So some retirement accounts, and the easy one here is a 401k. It is pre-tax dollars. If you get paid X amount, you contribute some to your 401k. That contribution has not ever been taxed before. Okay. And so if you are being awarded, let's say, $10,000 from a 401k as part of a divorce, you will not walk away with $10,000 because when you eventually withdraw that money, there will be taxes because it's never been taxed before. So a lot of times we'll do sort of an estimated standard rate of maybe 20% to account for those taxes that somebody will pay. So, for purposes of a property division, if I am awarded $10,000 from a 401k, generally we're going to be thinking about that more like $8,000 of actual value that I'm going to receive because I will be paying that 20% on the taxes. That is different from a post tax retirement account where I take money that I've already been taxed on and then I contribute it to a retirement account. So once that money goes into the retirement account, it has already been taxed and it is not then going to be taxed again when I take that money out at some point down the road. And so we don't apply that tax discount. That 10,000 is actually 10,000 in value to me. And so you always want to make sure that you're considering the tax implications because if somebody has $50,000 in cash and $50,000 in 401k, that is not equivalent value. So if we're trying to go for an equal division, which is presumed to be fair, we want to make sure that we're considering the relative value of those based on who's going to be paying taxes on what.
Absolutely. Apples to apples, because taxes are real. And on a big chunk of money in a 401k, you could be talking tens of thousands of dollars in taxes down the line. So you want to make sure that those are factored into the division up front. Now, we've agreed on the settlement, right? We've worked out the numbers, we've determined the taxes, and we say, each party is going to be getting 50% of this 401k or 50% of this pension. How are they actually divided then?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Generally, that happens after the divorce is finalized. There's some specific paperwork, specifically what we call a qualified domestic relations order, or a quadro, QDRO, what have you. There's a lot of different names that we use, but it's a special court order that actually divides one of these retirement accounts. It is not controversial, like you're not negotiating the paperwork, but it is a lot of paper pushing. So the long and short of it is that if I'm awarded 50% of a 401k, okay, after the divorce, we have an outside firm generally put together this quadro. They will run it by the plan administrator to make sure it complies with all of their different rules. And this is all because of ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, that has all these technical rules and regulations. The court then will sign off on that quadro. The quadro then gets sent to the plan administrator, who actually then divvies out the account. So then I get contacted by Fidelity or whoever it is saying, hey, you have an account now with 50% of this value. What do you want to do with it? And then generally speaking, my options are I can keep it, I can maybe roll it over, I could cash it out, pay taxes, but cash it out. But then that's the choice of the person receiving the funds. So it's not controversial, but there is quite a bit of paperwork involved in one of these quadros, which brings up kind of a good point, which is if you can avoid dividing each account 50-50 and just do, I get one account, you get one account, and then maybe we do an offset with a third account, that's usually preferable because it's a lot less paperwork than having to do a quadro for each one of those individual accounts.
Is there a fee for each QDRO or
There is.
qualification?
Yep,
Yeah.
there is. So it's a couple $100. In the grand scheme of what people are usually getting from a retirement account, it's well worth the money spent. When we're dividing an account, it could be, like you said, tens of thousands of dollars. So in the grand scheme of things, $400 is not terrible. But I have had accounts that are, maybe somebody really young just started a new job and their account is worth $800. And we have to make that sort of cost benefit decision. Is it really worth spending $400 to buy this $800 account? And the answer to that is no.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, if we use this mechanism of a QDRO, do we get around certain rules of, dividing? Normally, you divide a retirement account before a certain age, and you're going to be looking at penalties. So, how does a QDRO help us out with that?
So a QDRO or Quadro allows somebody to then have that account moved over into an account of their choosing, rolled over into a different retirement account with a different company, what have you. And there's no penalty for that. Now, if somebody then chooses to liquidate and actually take out the money, then they will still pay, taxes on that. But the actual transfer from one account to another is not a taxable event.
Understood. So you can avoid these early withdrawal penalties that you would normally incur if you're under retirement age. The QDRO works around that, but death and taxes still applies. You're going to pay taxes when you take money out,
Yeah.
regardless.
And I want to circle back just on a pension real quick. A couple little considerations. There are circumstances where it's appropriate to just split a pension equally and 50% to each party. And if that's the case, you don't necessarily have to get it valued, because no matter if it's worth $1 or $1 million, each party is getting the same value. And so as long as if you're doing an equal division and everything else is equalized out except for the pension, then dividing that equally doesn't generally then mean you have to get it valued. The other thing about pensions is that, and I include myself in this, your average person really doesn't know what their pension is worth. When I say, what is your pension worth? People will tell me what their expected monthly benefit is, but that's not accounting for how many payments are you going to receive? At what point can you start receiving it? Is it a year from now? Is it 10 years from now? And so I have had circumstances where people come to me and they say, we just want to each keep our own retirement. She can keep her retirement. I'm going to keep my retirement. And that, can be a solution if people agree. The problem is people don't know what the pension is worth. And so I've had evaluations done where a pension has come back at 20,000 and I had no idea what it would be. It's 20,000. I've had pension valuations come back at 500,000 and I couldn't have told you whether it was going to be more or less than 100,000. So we really don't know without getting that professional valuation done. And it's really important to get a sense of that, because again, if you're just going to each do your own retirement, the values might be substantially different, even if it feels maybe fair to just each keep their own. It may or may not be.
And so, are we talking a few $100 to have a pension valued?
Yeah. So again, it's generally well worth the investment. If nothing else, it's peace of mind. You're not relying on guesswork or a gut feeling. You're getting an actual, professional value, and it could be swings of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so a couple $100 is worth it.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This was incredibly helpful and enlightening. And as always, I appreciate your time and sharing with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Retirement accounts can be complex to divide, but they're not the only asset that can trip people up. For many divorcing couples, their house is their biggest asset, and getting the value wrong can cost tens of thousands. In our next episode, we walk through how to handle real estate valuations the right way.